premature aging and premature death are heavily associated with lack of sleep. He said that the time that we switch from when we get 1 hour less sleep, the rate of heart attacks goes up 24% the next morning. If you have consistently 5 hours sleep instead of over 7, then your testosterone levels can be half that of someone who gets that much more sleep, and something similar with progesterone. Dreams are a gateway to the unconscious. Alcohol is just as bad in terms of its effect on sleep as caffeine. If you don't get enough REM sleep, this is often where memory is affected. People who chronically lack sleep, yes, it can manifest physically, but it often manifests before that mentally and emotionally.
Hi, and welcome to the Rejuvenate Podcast. I'm your host, Krissy Hawks, and I'm here with my co-host, Elwin Robinson. And today we are talking sleep. So, Elwin, I know this is a massive topic for everyone out there. So tell me, why are we talking about sleep today?
Well, it feels like a long time coming. It's a super important topic, as we're going to talk about. And it really supports all the other areas, pretty much literally, that we've talked about so far. But it especially came up when we did the brain health recently. And I was like, oh, yes. I said, I did very brief lip service during the Memory and Focus episode about how important sleep is. And I said, I'll explain that more fully when we do a full episode. So here we are now. But yeah, it has such a huge impact on physical health, but also mental health and emotional health, and the whole topic of rejuvenation, the very thing that we named this podcast after. So yeah, like I say, a long time coming.
Wonderful, wonderful. So let's, get into it. Why do we sleep?
So I don't want to go too much into that question, because I find like if you're watching this, there's a good chance that you're like, it's 3 a.m. and you're trying to get to sleep and you don't want to hear about the benefits of sleep. So we will get to the practical stuff pretty soon. But we have to just, touch upon that a little bit, because I think intuitively a lot of us have known for, maybe throughout history or for a long time how important it is. But it's something that's only really recently been scientifically clarified. And I have to give credit to guy called Matthew Walker for this. He did a great book called Why We Sleep. I think it's called Why Do We Sleep? Why We Sleep. And he hasn't just written a book. He spent decades researching the topic and doing tests and like really, really digging into it. And it turns out we sleep for everything. So if I were to use kind of the words I like to use, I'd say we need it for rejuvenation, recovery, regeneration, recharging, all of those words. So rejuvenation meaning to make young again, and funnily enough, premature aging and in fact premature death are heavily associated with lack of sleep. We'll talk about lack of sleep soon, I'm sure. Recharging, obviously we are aware that we have less energy if we consistently don't sleep enough. Recovery, regeneration, detoxification, immune system health, physical and mental and emotional health, as I said. I think learning, processing, and remembering are a huge part of sleep, specifically that we don't get, that it's in charge of more than almost anything else. And when I say learning, processing, and remembering, I'm not just talking about exams and stuff like that. I'm talking about life. That Einstein quote of the definition of insanity is to keep doing the same thing, expecting a different result. So another way of saying that is not learning by experience, right? You keep doing something and you're not learning that it's not working. Well, it's very easy to make fun of people when they do that, but are they just sleep deprived? Quite possibly, right? Because they're not learning from experience. There may be a psychological reason as well why they're not learning from experience, but it may well be that biological reason that sleep is when that processing and remembering and working it out, and maybe that's not a good idea. Creativity is another thing that sleep helps us to do. So the less sleep we get, the more that we feel kind of boxed into a small world with limited options, and limited things that we can do for ourselves. So all that kind of stuff. The ability to be rational, I think, is an aspect of sleep which is super important and not really focused on. By rational, I don't mean logical, right? So you can kind of justify anything with logic and I don't mean that. When I say rational, I mean the ability to. So we have generally it's considered to be three areas of the brain, right? We've got the reptilian part of the brain at the back, which is heavily focused on our survival processes. Simple things like keeping our heart beating and stuff like that. But also it's the kind of territorial part, the fight or flight part, the aggressive part, all of that kind of stuff. Then we have our middle part of the brain, which is the mammalian brain. And so this is the emotional part of the brain. It's got the amygdala right in the middle, the center of emotion. And it's much more, also known as the limbic brain. And it's much more focused on our social kind of role, right? Like whether we're connected, how we feel about different things. And all these parts of the brains are crucial. And then but the part of us that makes us so unique is our prefrontal cortex, the neocortex, and especially the prefrontal cortex, and how much bigger that is compared to the other parts of the brain, compared to other animals. Because people say, it's not just the size of the brain that makes humans different, because obviously an animal like a whale has a much bigger brain than us, and they're pretty intelligent as well, but they don't have that same thing that chimps have to some degree and dolphins have to some degree that we have a lot, because it's the ratio of how big that frontal part is compared to the hind parts. So anyway, because that is the newest part, it's also the first part to be down-regulated, to get less resources if there is a lack of resources. And so when we don't sleep, we're much more likely to be in that like reactive, purely survival state, and we're much more likely to be in that again reactive emotional state than we are to be in a proactive let me think things through, let me make decisions, let me weigh things up, let me look at evidence, let me look at reason, let me pursue the truth, let me prioritize, set goals, create, all of that kind of stuff, which is really the benchmark of what could and often is good about humanity, gets less and less priority and less energy when we're in a sleep deprived state. So I think that's a big part that often isn't focused on, is that ability to really have the prefrontal cortex firing in all cylinders.
Yeah, fantastic. I mean, that's also part of the advancements of where we are and how our brains are working, and, understanding. I know there's that reptilian brain, which is all about survival, but there's not a lot of, and you can please correct me on this because I by no means know with the ins and outs of the specifics, but that's just purely there for survival to keep us going. There's not a lot of logic sometimes in that area, but of course this body is here to
survival and reproduction. That's the other
exactly.
thing. Yes.
Yeah.
Which is survival of the genes. So either way.
Yeah,
yep.
Absolutely. No, thank you for that distinction. So moving into going more in depth into sleep, I mean, there's a lot of things out there. You've seen it where, there's the lack of sleep or things like that for interrogation purposes or stuff like that. We can see that has the effect. They obviously know that those kind of techniques work, but for all of us that are just living our day to day, that are, going to our jobs, home on the weekends, things like that, we're not, experiencing something that's as intense as that, but we, may be going through some poor sleep quality or things like that. So, what is the overall impact of poor sleep or sleep deprivation to this body?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's huge. I just gave one example, like less ability to be rational. If we just think about what impact that has on our lives, if we make less rational decisions, we're more likely to, choose foods that are bad for us, choose partners that are bad for us, choose careers that are bad for us, make decisions within all of those areas that are bad for us, more likely to take drugs, like get involved in things we shouldn't. I mean, it's endless, right? So that's just one example. But yeah, let's do the full gamut. And again, I'll do it quickly. So premature aging and death is one of the so as in premature aging and premature death is one of the fundamental impacts of sleep deprivation. Now, of course, that's not immediate. But it is significant. And so just listening to Matthew Walker recently, he talked about how there's this very large-scale test done twice a year to show the impact of less sleep, and it's when we go into daylight saving times, which it's a test that impacts over 1.5 billion people. And so he said that the time that we switch from when we get 1 hour less sleep, the rate of heart attacks goes up 24% the next morning. And the time when we switch, so we have an hour more sleep, we have 21% less heart attacks the next morning. So, I mean, that's you could say it's anecdotal. It's not anecdotal. It's that's averages over more than 1 billion people, and it's on an ongoing yearly basis. So if that's not relevant epidemiology, then almost no epidemiological study is ever relevant. I mean, that's super, super broad and helpful. So that gives us an idea, right? So why is that the case? Because of what I just said before, right? Like that recharging, regeneration, like literally regeneration on a DNA level, regeneration on a cellular level, regeneration on an organ level, like everything that needs to be kind of processed and dealt with and worked on. If that is happening less, then everything works less well. And if you're already on the brink, if you're teetering on the edge of a major event, a heart attack, a stroke, or whatever, then just that less. But it shows how little, how just 1 day less can have that kind of impact. Imagine what the impact can be if it goes on and on and on. So we'll talk more about that later. Another big one is mental health issues. So I talked earlier about that processing stuff, right? So a lot of the time when we don't have that time to process again for a long time, months, years, decades, then our ability to learn and understand and deal with the world becomes less and less. Now, if we're in a, Disney, everything is happy clappy kind of environment where there's no issues, then that's just unfortunate or annoying. But if our environment is already highly stressful, traumatizing, or challenging in many, many other ways, then people can be resilient. We can overcome a tremendous amount of adversity and still shine in terms of our mental health and our emotional health. But our chances of that statistically go down with every minute less sleep we have on average. So the less sleep you have, the more chance there is that trauma is you're not going to overcome it. That adverse situation, that you're not going to be able to overcome it. So it's a hugely big deal. So that's kind of like mental health in the way that it's usually used. And then also in the sense of focus, memory, processing speed, and all the rest of it. That's all based on, the brain having enough energy, the brain having everything work as it should, which again, if we're not repairing and regenerating and rejuvenating and all the rest of it, is also going to go down. In fact, it's performance in every area, not just the brain. So, reaction times, people are much more likely to get in traffic accidents, for instance, if they haven't slept either, like last night or over a period of time. So that's predictive. In all kinds of areas, people where slight variations in performance make a huge difference, like athletes, for instance, sports people. They've measured that a lot and seen that, the reaction time to catch the ball or kick the ball or whatever it might be, goes down significantly. Or if we're talking about more common athletics, then your speed you're going to run a race is going to go down or whatever. Like all of that is going to be impacted negatively. Practically, I find that these things are especially noticeable in areas where boosting stress chemicals, either with stimulants or just with your mind, doesn't help. So, for example, a lot of people think, oh, I'm okay with the amount of sleep I had because I still have enough energy, or I still have plenty of energy even. And the thing is that energy can be faked with stress and stimulants. In fact, faked maybe isn't technically correct. I mean, it's real energy, but what it is it's drawing on a reserve of energy that is not ultimately sustainable. So, um, so energy, mental focus to some degree, processing speed to some degree, even things like reflexes and reactions to some degree. These can all be artificially boosted with stress chemicals. Most of the time people do that with stimulants, coffee, caffeine, and all the rest of it. And then, so those areas can you can get away with not sleeping and it still seems okay. But there are other areas like memory is one that I observe. People are still quick and sharp, but they just can't remember stuff because you can't fake that with stimulants. Recovery, we just talked about, athletic performance, like your stamina being high. But this could also be, depends. These days, more people do mental jobs than physical jobs. But if you have to be on your feet all day because you've got a physical job, then that's going to be more difficult. You're going to feel the need to sit down earlier. You're going to be in pain sooner. If you have to, be sitting down and using your brain, you're going to get to a point of fatigue more quickly. Although, as I say, you can push through that with chemicals, stress chemicals and caffeine, but it's still going to be more difficult. And immunity is a big one as well. So you're more likely, if you have chronic diseases, chronic infections, they're going to be more likely to flare up, whether it's sinus, UTIs, fungus, et cetera, all the ones that we've talked about many times before. And then you're also more susceptible to actually catching some kind of acute infection as well, whether it's, you get food poisoning, whereas the person you went with doesn't, even though you both ate the same, or you get a cold, even though someone else doesn't, even though you were both in the same room, all of that kind of stuff, right? So lower immune system function. It impacts all your hormones. So we've done quite a few episodes now on hormones, and we know how important those are. We know how crucially important it is that testosterone is high for men or progesterone is high for women, for instance. Well, both of those take a massive dive, like as in if you have consistently 5 hours sleep instead of over 7, then your testosterone levels can be half that of someone who gets that much more sleep, and something similar with progesterone. Matthew Walker even talks about how men who sleep less than 5 hours have significantly smaller testicles than men who sleep over 7. So, which is an indicator of testosterone production. But yeah, just I guess it's literally, shriveling away. And I don't think the ovaries are as easy to measure as the testicles, but I wouldn't be shocked if it was something similar to that. Like those hormone producing glands are really negatively impacted. So, as I said, every episode that we've done, detoxification and cardiovascular health and oral health, all the rest of it, digestive health, every single area that we talked about is negatively impacted through lack of sleep.
Wow, that's a big list, and all of those are extremely important, and we need as much of our faculties around us to be able to function, because as well, that's what one of the biggest reasons for me, the impetus is finding that optimal space for longevity and happiness, and to really be able to get the best out of this life. And so, that's what's become apparent to me as we've gone on this discovery as well. It's like I knew sleep was important, but really diving deeper into the ins and outs and the whys of sleep. And then also having the direct experience of what a really great night's sleep feels like. And then the next day, because it's not just waking up in that morning, but then it's that sustainable energy also too the next day.
Yep.
Beautiful. There's the two aspects of sleep, the non-REM sleep and the REM sleep. Why are each of those phases important when we sleep?
Yeah, it's a good question. So normally it's kind of divided into deep sleep, light sleep, and REM sleep, I think. And people these days, they often track their sleep with those apps with is it Fitbit or a Oura Ring or something like that. And I think that's often how it categorizes them into those 3 categories. But I'm happy to categorize them the way you said, because you're highlighting REM sleep, which is the crucial one. So deep sleep especially is where we are doing the stuff that I said, but especially more physically. And so physically affects everything. It affects the hormones, it affects the central nervous system, it affects the brain, but it's more of a, cells are being broken down, they're being recycled, they're being replicated. genes, organs are going through their processes of detoxification and clearance, and et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. The REM sleep is more about, it's less about hardware and more about software, if that is a useful analogy. So rather than the physical rejuvenation, it's the psychological, mental stroke emotional rejuvenation that's going on. And so this is, often referred to as dreaming sleep. REM stands for rapid eye movement. Sorry, for anyone who we haven't clarified that for. And that's because they found that people who are like rapidly blinking while they're asleep, that correlates with dreaming. And so in terms of the brain waves, that's especially the alpha brain wave. So the deep sleep is a delta brain wave. The theta is more like the light sleep, and then the alpha is the REM sleep. And so the REM sleep is where we are doing what I mentioned earlier, that learning from, processing, and then deciding what to commit to memory of previous experience. Now, there is some talk as well. It's not only about previous experience, it's also maybe about future experience. And so with dreams, you also have a creative aspect to them, which is significant. And this is perhaps why some people have experiences of, what used to be called prophetic dreams, right? It happened to me in a dream and then it eventually happened. Maybe it's because the dream magically made it happen, or maybe it's simply that by creating a template for it, your whole system then knew to move towards that experience and make that experience happen. I guess it's hard to prove that one way or the other, but most of the mainstream scientific establishment would say there's no such thing as magic powers, so then it must be just not necessarily a coincidence, but because you're having that experience, so you have more of an expectation of it happening, and so therefore you're more likely to be able to make it happen. There's this idea as well of people who rehearse things a lot beforehand in their mind are much more likely to successfully make that happen in the real world. So obviously you can rehearse that in your mind during the day, which would be daydreaming, but doing it at night would be, actual REM sleep dreaming. But anyway, so I'm getting more into the speculative area. Back to the processing of past experience. So that, from a mainstream scientific point of view, is the main point of that. And so it's like working through those experiences, and often it's more on the mammalian level. It's more on the feeling and even the reptile brain, the extinctual level. That's why dreams often don't make sense from a rational point of view, but they often can if you just look at the emotions and the feelings behind them. And so what your brain is, or your whole system is doing there, is sorting through these experiences, deciding what it can learn, and deciding what is worth remembering and what is not, and taking the stuff that is worth remembering and taking it from short-term memory and putting it into long-term memory. And so again, if you don't get enough REM sleep, this is often where memory is affected, because we have so much going on. I think there's a tiny percentage of people who have that photographic memory where they can literally like rewind and see everything that happened to them for a period of time, but that's extremely rare. I certainly don't have that, and I have what's generally considered to be a top 1% memory according to tests, and I'm still nowhere near that. So that's incredibly rare. So for the rest of us, definitely including me, we don't remember everything. And so we have to decide what we're going to remember. And that doesn't happen consciously. Like we talked about in the memory episode, like when there's a lot of adrenaline pumping through you during a particular experience, that often is a signal that this is an important experience, this is worth remembering. But other than that, the brain, and unfortunately, if that's the only signal that we have because we don't get enough REM sleep, then we will tend to our memories will just be filled with lots of fearful, anxious, stressful, traumatic experiences, because that's the only clue that our brain has. But obviously, we are able to function better than that. Not everyone is in that state of just reacting to negativity, of course. Otherwise, we wouldn't have the civilization and the people that we have in the world. And so there must be another aspect to it. And this is it. The brain can actually process and go, okay, this is important. This is better. And it has that ability to prioritize. Now, here's the important thing about REM sleep versus the other types, deep sleep and light sleep. When you first start, your brain goes through these rhythms of 90 to 120 minutes, and then you actually wake up. You don't necessarily remember, and we'll talk later probably about that, waking up and stuff like that, but you kind of wake up and then you go back into it. Ideally, you don't remember that. But if you have one of those sleep tracker things, it'll show you that, you'll see that. And so during the first one or two of those, it's going to be mainly deep sleep and light sleep and not much REM sleep. Why? Because the survival of the physical organism is more important than the learning from experience, right? If it has to choose. The more of those 90 to 120 minute blocks you have, the higher the percentage of REM to the other types of sleep. At which point, between, say, 8 and 10 hours of sleep, so that last block, it might be 80+% of REM sleep. Whereas that first 120-minute block, it might be less than 20% of REM sleep. So what this means in practical terms, for you non-mathematicians out there, is that the difference between 6 and 7 and 8 hours sleep, let's say 6 and 8 hours sleep, may not seem that huge, and it actually doesn't have a huge impact on deep sleep, but it has a huge impact on REM sleep. So if you have 2 hours less sleep, 6 instead of 8, you might have 40, 50, 60% less REM sleep, depending on, individual variation. And so this is where what I perceive a lot of time is people who chronically lack sleep. Yes, it can manifest physically, but it often manifests before that mentally and emotionally, because the thing that they're really lacking and missing out on is not the physical rejuvenation, it's the psychological rejuvenation. And so this is often where people think that they're fine when they don't have enough sleep, because usually they use stimulants or stress to give them the energy to still function. And all the stuff that I said, is still possible beforehand. And then they don't get ill. They don't necessarily have health issues. And they're like, I'm great. I do great on 5 or 6 hours sleep. And they don't realize, because there is an interesting thing about the brain, that it's not very good at measuring its own performance, So the brain is like monitoring every other organ and every other system in the body, but it's hard for it to see itself by definition. So often, this you can often see in terms of when you actually relate to people who are to some degree delusional, right? There's all kinds of aspects that's been studied a lot, like cognitive dissonance. When someone is delusional, pointing out that they are delusional to them, no matter how gently, tactfully, and compassionately, is often completely ineffective, right? Because first of all, and I think sleep is a big part of that. First of all, if they're not getting enough sleep, then their ability to rationally think things through. So I said a lack of rationality. One of the most important things that the rational mind does, which again, more the prefrontal cortex, is to be able to work out what is and is not true. And secondarily, prefrontal cortex is required to even care what is and is not true. So the prefrontal cortex is the only part that cares. The mammalian part only cares about the tribe, about the group, what they think. They will happily go along if the majority is in a certain direction. If a person is primarily coming from that and the prefrontal cortex is not fully energized, they're much more likely to just go along with the group. And then the person who's really struggling and is mainly coming from that hindbrain, all they care about is surviving and reproducing. And they do not care about the tribe, and they do not care about what's true, So And there are other reasons for that. There's genetic reasons why people might have proclivity to be more in one area of the brain than the other. I'm not saying it's only about sleep, and there's a conditioning aspect to it, and there's other aspects of it. But all things being equal, even someone who's really committed to caring about truth and what's real and what's right and all the rest of it, consistent lack of sleep will make it not only harder and harder to see what's actually true and real, it will make it harder and harder to even care what's true and real. So yeah, this is another reason why it's really super important to get enough sleep and to get that REM sleep, so that then the prefrontal cortex is able to function properly.
Yeah, so it's definitely, both are extremely valuable and necessary. So what you've made is a great distinction between survival of the organism is what is put first on the priority list. It doesn't mean that it's that you forego the latter half of sleep, because that also has a vital aspect. I know it's something we've been discussing with me and memory, as we were talking about earlier. So, and hopefully getting those longer sleep cycles in will help attain that more memory capability.
Yes, and it's not the only thing. I have to say, toxicity is another thing that can impact memory, and I've noticed my memory has not been as good the last 3 years since I dealt with that toxicity thing, which I shared in previous videos. So I'm not saying it's the be-all and end-all only thing, but I think it is the most common thing that affects that memory and cognition issue.
Going into, we were just discussing the non-REM and the REM sleep. Now, there are some people out there that say they don't dream. Why would this be, and what role or function do dreams have? That's
a good question. So I think there could be biological and psychological reasons for that. So to about biological first. First of all, they may be this. I don't think that happens to people who have 9 hours sleep a night who would say that. That's more people who get 7 at the most, and they're probably generally waking up when they are not in the middle of REM sleep. And that's fine. You're not meant to wake up in the middle of REM sleep necessarily, unless you are having that long period of sleep. So that in itself is not necessarily an issue, that you do not remember a dream. But if you consistently do not remember a dream, remember I said earlier about the percentage chance that you will be dreaming goes up a lot, beyond a certain point, especially beyond that kind of 5 hour or 6 hour-ish mark. So if you're consistently waking up after, 4, 5, maybe even 6 hours, then it could be that you're literally just waking up when you haven't just had that REM sleep. So that could be the physical reason. I suspect, though, that that's probably not enough on its own, and it's often a psychological reason. So if we go to the world of the psychologists, psychiatrists, therapists, those kind of people for a second, and especially the founding fathers of those systems, so especially Freud and Jung, they talked about how dreams are a gateway to the unconscious. So the unconscious being, and this is validated from a scientific point of view, they say that by the time our conscious mind realizes we've made a decision, that decision's already made. They can see that in the brain. So the vast majority of what's going on inside us in terms of how we feel about things, in terms of how we respond to things, and even in terms of decisions we make, which we would think would be a conscious prefrontal, something that is in awareness, actually happens below awareness in our unconscious mind. And so some people are very, what's the word? They don't like to hear that, what I just said. I remember having a conversation with someone last year, and it was a heated conversation that took a long time. And eventually I realized, wait a minute, this person isn't aware that they have an unconscious mind. They feel like, I can't remember if I did this quote somewhere before, but it was such a good one. I was rewatching an old TV show at the time called Frasier. And it's about a Freudian psychologist, quite famous, right? Krissy. He made a comment which the canned laughter audience found was funny, but I don't know if they appreciated just why it was so funny. He goes, "Oh, don't be ridiculous. I'm a trained psychologist from Harvard. If I were repressing something, I'd know about it." And I think the audience was laughing at his arrogance and pomposity, But I think the thing that truly is profound about that is the idea, because I actually hear this a lot from people, and being more educated does not reduce this foolishness, it often increases it, that they say, if I was repressing something, I'd know about it. The very definition of repression means you don't know about it. They're confusing suppression with repression. So suppression is where you know about it and you're like, oh, I don't want to deal with that. But repression is, everything's good. I've got no idea. That's the very definition of repression. So by definition, if you're repressing something, you don't know about it, right? Now, all that repressed stuff exists somewhere in the subconscious, unconscious, which dreams are the gateways to. And so when someone does have that, I don't have a subconscious, I don't have an unconscious attitude, or if they have an attitude of, I don't want to hear about it. So actually the suppression thing too, I don't want to think about that, I don't want to remember that, I don't want to be aware of that. If that's strong in them, and again, they may not be aware that that's strong in them, the fact, so they may first repress the feeling, again, unconsciously and automatically, and then they've repressed the decision that they repressed it, if that makes sense. Like they don't, they're like, and everything's fine on the surface. And so what's that got to do with the people not remembering dreams thing? Well, I would speculate that those who don't remember the dream, it's because they quickly disassociate from it because they don't want to remember. They do not want any connection to that subconscious stroke unconscious mind, because in there be dragons. You know, there's all kinds of stuff there that they don't want to be aware of, traumas and awarenesses and maybe guilt and shame and all these intense feelings. And so as a protective mechanism, the brain just disassociates. And we talked about dissociation in, I guess, a few episodes, but recently in the memory and focus one. It's a protective mechanism by the brain. So I think dissociation is a big part of it as well. And so the people who say they usually don't remember, it may just be that they don't get enough sleep and they're waking up when they're not dreaming. But if they say they never remember, I would tend to suspect dissociation.
Okay, good. I mean, I do know that there are some drugs out there that do, impact our body's ability to reach certain stages of sleep. So I also wasn't sure if that could also be potentially a factor as well. That's
a great point. Yeah, I hadn't thought of that, but you're absolutely right. Yeah. If you're taking anything that messes with your body's natural systems, which unfortunately most of us are these days, and suppresses that part, then that could absolutely be why. And there are, I know that must be possible, even though I haven't looked into it like you maybe have, Krissy, because I know that there are things that do the opposite. There are, specific herbs and stuff that you can take, and substances, I think, as well, before sleep that really intensify your dreams and make your dreams more vivid. So if it's possible to suppress if it's possible to exaggerate your dreams, it must be possible to suppress them as well. I haven't looked into that.
Something deeper to look into for sure at some point.
Yeah.
I know for our bodies have a wonderful capacity to, tolerate certain things like caffeine, alcohol, acclimatize to it, so we have a tolerance level that gets raised. Is that what happens to, like, let's say we've been sleep deprived for so long, do, chronically impaired by sleep, whether it's, for a short period of time or for an extremely long period of time, do our brains identify that process, or is it purely that it's, it's got total amnesia about it? What's the impact of all that? Like, do we even know?
Yeah, it's a really good question. Yeah, that thing of habituation, right? I think you're talking about, like, not just tolerance, but we literally just get used to the level of functioning that we have. This absolutely happens. It even happens with things that you wouldn't think it would, like chronic pain, right? People who are in pain for years and decades, often that just becomes normal to them. And this absolutely happens with all kinds of other health issues, digestive issues and, infections and all the rest of it. People just, eventually they just take it, it's normal to, constantly being in pain. It's normal to, get acid reflux every time I eat, and they don't even think about it. And then you ask them, do you have any health issues? And they say, nope. And then, like, this happens a lot. And then I get into it with them and I'm like, well, what about this area? What about this? Well, oh yeah, well, I do have that. And I do have that. I don't think often they aren't lying or being evasive or anything when I first ask. It's just, the mechanism you just said. They're so habituated to that being a normal way of being. Now, so if that can be the case with, say, digestive issues, oh, I thought it was normal to, have violent diarrhea every time I eat X or whatever, right? So if that is normal, then imagine how much more of a tendency there is for that with the brain. Because as we just said, like the brain, it's much more difficult for the brain to monitor its own functioning than it is to monitor the functioning of some other part of our body-mind system. So absolutely, I think that is a huge part of it. It's just that people don't realize that, they get used to it. And as I said, because one of the main side effects of suboptimal but not dangerous levels of lack of sleep, like 5 hours, 6 hours on an ongoing basis, is lack of rational thinking, lack of critical thinking, lack of being able to discern reality and truth from, delusion and opinion and, feelings and stuff like that. It's so incredibly easy to go, this is normal. And if there's also a bit of, psychologically, again, a bit of narcissism in there, then it's also very easy to go into, this is better. I'm superior. The way I am is superior. The fact that I only need 5 or 6 hours or whatever a night's sleep means that I'm better than you. And they'll boast about it and they'll be proud. And now, don't get me wrong. Look, if you need a few nights with less sleep and you don't fall apart as a result, you are in a better position than someone who does. I'm not denying that. I'm not saying that being able to get away with less sleep is not a sign of some degree of health. It is. But what I'm saying is it's nothing to be proud of. It's no different to, I drank 10 units of alcohol and I'm still standing or something like that. It's okay, you can be proud that you've survived something or that you're tough enough to deal with something, but that doesn't mean that, being able to, I just drank 10 glasses or whatever and I'm still standing. Okay, not a good idea, but if you're proud of that, it kind of makes sense. But don't then switch that into, I'm better than you because I always drink 10 glasses of alcohol every night. It's like, that's a superior way of functioning. No, that doesn't make sense. You can be proud of yourself because you can survive a stressor, and do better than someone else maybe with a stressor. That's fine. Except for what you said, Krissy, which is that habituation thing. So just like with alcohol, if you never drink alcohol, you're probably going to last a lot worse with 10 drinks than someone who drinks it every night because their body has habituated to compromising, to dealing with that. And it's exactly the same with sleep. So someone who's used to getting 5 hours sleep will do better. And then you're used to getting 8 hours sleep and you suddenly get 5. You wake up in the morning and you feel maybe not great. They wake up in the morning, they feel same as usual, which, as we said, we can have quite a good facsimile of great. And so be like, oh, well, they're better than me. They're stronger than me. No, they're just more adapted to that specific stressor. That's all. Just like, or with smoking, right? I remember when I first smoked, I coughed all the time. After, a few years of it, I was able to, take a huge hit off a bong and, have a vast amount of smoke going into my lungs, no coughing. Was that a sign of how healthy my lungs were? Of course not. They were just adapted to that particular stressor. And it's exactly the same with a lack of sleep. It's exactly the same. Yes. So when I say, having less sleep can be like being able to cope with less sleep, what I mean is if all the other variables are the same. So meaning, if me and you, say, Krissy, and we both have 8 hours sleep a night each on an ongoing basis, and then for some reason we both have 5 hours sleep, if you're doing significantly better than me, then that shows that you're healthier. But if you normally have 5 hours and I normally have 8, and then we have 5 hours and you do better, that's just a sign that you've habituated to it. I hope that makes sense.
We're going to take a quick break to share with you one of our amazing sponsors, Genetic Insights. What makes Genetic Insights uniquely valuable is that they test over 83 million different variants, which guarantees a 99.7% accuracy on all of their DNA reports. With over 100 reports available, you get comprehensive insights into what your DNA is telling you about how to optimize your health today and in the future. I found reviewing my results to be incredibly accurate and applying some of the recommendations, which are personalized to your individual DNA, to be extremely helpful for me and my family. I also loved how easy it was to upload my raw DNA data that I already had from previously using Ancestry.com, because Genetic Insights supports uploading raw data from all major platforms. To get your health reports, go to geneticinsights.co and get 20% off today by using coupon code REJUVENATE. Remember that supporting our sponsors supports our podcast, which allows us to keep sharing this important information with you free of cost. So, go get your Genetic Insights health reports by going to geneticinsights.co and use coupon code REJUVENATE for 20% off today. Yeah, that makes sense. Absolutely. So, insomnia. That is a massive, massive issue for many, 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 many people. And it can mean different things for certain individuals, whether they can't fall asleep or whether they wake up in the middle of the night or, whatever that definition is for them. Why are there so many people suffering from it today? What's going on?
Well, all right, I made a list for this to prepare because I think there's so much to it. And I'll get through it as quickly as we can. So first of all, I've put them into three categories: psychological, biochemical, and then lifestyle. So let's go to psychological first, because I've been talking about that already. So one reason is hypervigilance. So what hypervigilance means, as you can probably tell what it implies, is like always ready in case, right? And that in case is normally that in case a disaster brews. What is hypervigilance from a biochemical point of view? It's excessive activity in that back of the brain, the reptilian part of the brain. Usually it happens to someone who's either had extreme trauma or just a lot of mild trauma or neglect, often referred to as complex PTSD. And so they just don't feel safe. It's as simple as that. And not only if you have hypervigilance, do you not feel safe, you probably think that people who do feel safe are crazy. Like, how are you just relaxed? How are you just, like, hypervigilance seems like a really good idea when you have that state. And so, of course, I've always got to be at edge. You never know. Well, it's true. Something could come and kill you. Something, that noise could be a murderer, right? And look at this news report. See, someone was murdered in their sleep last night. It was totally worth me waking up every time there was the slightest noise, because you never know, right? And there's always evidence to support that point of view, especially in our modern media-based world, right? So hypervigilance is a big one, and it's not particularly easy to address and resolve. That's going to need major work. We'll maybe touch on that a little bit later. Another psychological reason, feeling like sleep is a waste of time. I mean, I think that's why Matthew Walker's book is good. That's why we spent as much time as we did on it, even though I wasn't intending to. It's because it's so ingrained in us, and this is especially like a Protestant work ethic. I think this is a cultural thing, that that productivity is key, and that you may or may not be productive to any degree while you're awake, but you're definitely not productive when you're asleep. And so I say Protestant, but like my wife's from a communist country, it's absolutely in that as well. Like that kind of thing of, if you're not producing, if you're not doing, then you are worthless, right? Is like a really strong thing in many, many, many people. So I actually would encourage even more of a reframe on this than I've given. So we could say, okay, it is a kind of waste of time, but it's helping you to recover so you can do better the next day. So that's like one level of acceptance of the value of sleep. But I think even deeper than that is, when I did a lot of spiritual learning, and from that perspective, and this is still the case in a lot of cultures that have more of a connection to their ancient roots than we do. So when you sleep, your conscious mind is in charge. When you are dreaming, your subconscious is in charge, or it's like a bridge to your unconscious. But then when you're in deep sleep, your unconscious is there. And so, in fact, some of the spiritual traditions would say that true enlightenment is when you are conscious even during dreaming, which they call lucid dreaming. And that's one level. But true enlightenment is when you can even be conscious during deep sleep. Now, this is something I've never experienced, so I can't speak to it firsthand, but that's their belief. So anyway, they would say that the reason why it's so important to have that deep sleep connection is because you are connecting with God. You're connecting with, so, through your unconscious, you're connecting with the source of all life on earth, the source of consciousness. And so I would say by reducing sleep, this is my opinion, but sleep is not just a necessary process in order to recover and be more productive the next day. Sleep is when you connect with God, or whatever your version of God is, your unconscious, the universe, spirit, I don't know what you want to call it. And why would you want to reduce the amount of time you're doing that in a 24-hour period? So that's the way I look at it. Anyway, another big one that's psychological, which came across from this is from Alexander Lowen, the founder of bioenergetics, which I mentioned before. He said that, so we're talking about insomnia, right? So insomnia is falling asleep. He said that the resistance sometimes to falling asleep is the same resistance to falling in love. And that in either case, it's the element of falling, meaning it's both of them imply a loss of control. And so I touched upon this a little bit earlier when I talked about why some people might not be aware of dreams. It's like not wanting to surrender to something greater than you. And that is like, maybe a lot of people, what are you talking about, Elwin? That's not what sleep is. Well, it kind of is, right? Even from a psychological point of view, we're talking about your unconscious. Your conscious is just a tiny portion of your much bigger unconscious. So falling asleep is like your, tiny conscious mind, like surrendering to your much bigger unconscious mind. So I think that is a potential issue as well. And again, that's not easy to necessarily resolve. That's overcoming control issues, probably the, trauma and hypervigilance and all the rest of it that makes you feel like you have to be in control and you can't let go. Speaking of which, being mind dominant, mentally dominant. So what I observe is, even though I've praised the conscious mind and the prefrontal cortex a lot so far and being rational, the reality is a lot of the most foolish people in the world are people who overthink, not underthink, right? And so actually being really connected to those other parts of you is a really, really good thing. The limbic part of you and the reptilian part of you. In fact, again, the reptilian part of you, it's funny. On one hand, it's called like the fight or flight, survival and reproduction part of you. But on the other hand, it's also the part of you that's able to just be. It's like the most spiritual part of you at the same time. Wim Hof talks a lot about this, and he claims that his methods, his breathing and cold stuff, is one of the best things to allow you to easily access that, like as in send, electrical signals and blood flow and all the rest of that hind part of the brain. So anyway, if you're a kind of person who thinks, always thinking, always chatter in your head, overthinking, then that can make it really hard to fall asleep or in fact stay asleep. And then trauma in the body is another big one. I've talked about that before in various other episodes, so I won't go into that again, but just to reference that. If you have trauma in the body, then sometimes your body can be keeping you asleep. Maybe you're not, keeping yourself awake with mental chatter. Maybe you're even, willing to let go, but maybe it's that your body itself has this agitation in it because there's some kind of trauma going on. So that can really, really help to address that. So biochemical reasons. Lack of melatonin, right? So melatonin is the signal that tells your body to go to sleep. So it can be as simple as that. Lack of GABA. GABA is the part that quiets that prefrontal cortex, quiets the mind, and helps you to feel peaceful and relaxed, safe, everything's going to be okay, all of those kind of feelings. So if you don't have enough of that, it could be through psychological reasons like we talked about, but it could also simply be biological, as we've talked about in previous episodes. So, and that's often a good way to tell which it is take things which raise GABA, and then if your issues are gone, it was a chemical thing. If there's still some issues, then there's probably a psychological component to it as well. Excess stress chemicals, right? This could be because of you've had caffeine, especially if it's too late in the day, or any other kind of stimulant. That's going to raise the stress chemicals. Even dopamine. So dopamine is a stress chemical. It's a good one. We've talked a lot about the benefits of dopamine, but dopamine is, as we talked about, is that desire, to desire on the simplest level, which usually wants to achieve something, to get something, to do something. So again, not very helpful if you're trying to sleep. What we want is we always want the right balance of dopamine and GABA, as I've talked about in previous episodes. But we tend to want the dopamine higher during the day, and then we want it much lower and the GABA to be higher as the day goes on and on. Toxicity, I've talked about previously a lot, but just to say that if your body is struggling with toxicity, that is often where you struggle to get to sleep, especially if you struggle, and it's true for the next one I'm about to say as well, I'll say it now, parasites. If you have toxicity or parasites, this is often where you struggle to get to sleep, especially between the hours of 1 and 3 a.m., or if you have a tendency to wake up at that time. Those are rough timings, but it's at that time of night, roughly, that your liver does a lot of its clearing out and processing work. And so if you are overloaded, and toxicity and parasites being two big ones, if you're overloaded with toxicity, then your liver can struggle, and then it wakes you up. This has actually been one of the main causes for me for years. Not parasites, but the toxicity element.
I was going to ask about restless leg. Where does that fall into this category, into the biochemical aspect?
Yeah, it's a good question. I personally see that, as you said, more as biochemical. Some people see it as psychological, and sure enough, psychology can trigger it, right? As you get more anxious, it may well get worse. But this is usually down to a lack of either GABA. Sometimes it can even be a lack of dopamine. In general, though, not that you should have it high at night. Twitchiness is one of the early signs of chronic dopamine deficiency, like in Parkinson's. So I would either say it's that neurochemical issue, or it's a mineral issue, electrolyte issue. So it could be magnesium and potassium, I see the most commonly, but it could be any of the electrolytes. Number one place I'd probably start with is magnesium and GABA. That will resolve it most of the time. So back to my biochemical list. Pain is another one. We talked about pain in detail, so I won't talk about that. But yeah, of course, pain is something that can keep you awake, wake you up again, so you have to address that. And blood sugar is another big one. Blood sugar absolutely, if it is not balanced, can keep you awake and wake you up again. It's more of a thing that will wake you up again, but it could be either. Basically, blood sugars are related to energy and stress chemicals in a very meaningful way. So, meaning, your body needs to keep it stable. If your blood sugar gets low, then it has to kick in stress chemicals to raise them again, and especially cortisol, but others as well, unless you eat, of course. And so this can be where a person really struggles to get to sleep, is actually because their blood sugar is low. And so, sometimes it can actually be a good idea to eat before sleep, which is the opposite of what almost everyone teaches, but it depends. If you have a blood sugar issue, then sometimes it's a good idea, depending on how much of a digestive issue it will be to eat late at night, and depending on what you eat and all kinds of other factors. And then lastly, lifestyle. So I'll skip over this one quickly because everyone talks about this stuff, but blue light, these days everyone talks about it. Blue light is signal to your brain to be awake, stimulates cortisol and the stress chemicals. So if you're either just, lighting above you or devices, that is basically telling your brain, stay awake, be awake, be awake, be awake. And if you then do that and then, right, turn the phone off, time to go to bed, it's like you've been screaming at it, be awake all the time, and then suddenly you take that away. Unless you're really exhausted, it's not necessarily going to fall asleep straight away. So reducing and removing blue light, you can do that on your devices. You can, even with your light bulbs in your house, you can get, dimmers. You can get ones that will, turn off the blue and go just to red. There's various different strategies for addressing that. And of course, ideally, you just don't use those devices at all. But if you do use them, or electric lights at all, but if you do use them, then use the red light version. Heat is a big one. The body, we talked a lot about how important it is to have a strong metabolism, which one of the signs of that is good body heat in previous episodes. So ideally, you do want your body to be like 37 centigrade and 98.6 during the day, but you do want it to cool down at night. So it's not like for it to go down from 37 to 36 just before you fall asleep is fine. Doesn't mean your metabolism's screwed up or there's anything wrong with it. That's just normal part of falling asleep. And with Fahrenheit, what's that going to be? 96.5, something like that.
Do you know why the body does that?
Yeah, it's a cooling down process so that basically you need less energy, right? So as we talked about in the mitochondrial episode, when the mitochondrial decoupling that creates that excess energy, once you have like an optimal amount of ATP, you do not want, as much as you need enough ATP to do that regenerative process, like it's just a different mode. Maybe I don't have a really good answer for that, but it's like a different mode rather than it being in a rather than it being in a yang active get stuff energy production mode. It's in a repair, recuperate. It's yin versus yang. I guess I'd have a better answer than that. Too much light. Too much light in general. We talked about blue light, but bright lights in general. Noise, right? If you're in a noisy environment, it's going to be harder to get to sleep. I know some people say they adapt to it and that they're used to it. There is some evidence to say that constant noise like can be okay, right? But psychologically you can adapt to it. But the brain, that root reptilian part of the brain is always, when there's noise around, is always going to be a little bit, what's that? Right? Even if you're used to feeling like, what's that? That's like the hypervigilance thing, right? Even if you're used to being vigilant, it still doesn't mean that it's optimal. So I would say you want to reduce noise as much as possible. If you cannot do that in your environment, then I recommend earplugs. You know, there are these wax things that you can put in there to reduce the input of noise. And then there's, you know, the people around you. There's like, do you have the window open? There's an argument for yes, because fresh air is very important, but there's an argument for no because of the noise. So some people have significantly less good hearing than others, though. So if you have not great hearing, it's probably much less of an issue for you. There's one benefit, at least, of having suboptimal hearing is that you are genuinely less disturbed by noise and you're going to sleep a little bit easier despite noise. But if you are someone with good hearing, if you're someone who, then it is going to be disturbing you. And so, you know, and then, regularity is a big one that they often talk about. This is absolutely true. Like with a lot of these things. So there's the whole circadian rhythm element to it. We haven't even talked about that, and I think it's a too big a topic. Maybe we should do an episode on circadian rhythms at some point. But circadian rhythms are like the matchup, the synchronization between the rhythms of your own body and the rhythms of your body's environment, right? And so now the obvious thing is to say, go to bed when it gets dark, wake up when it gets light. But of course, you know, in my climate, that would mean sleeping 6 hours a night at one part of the year and 16 hours a night another part of the year. I mean, you know, it's not realistic, right? So we can't manage that exactly. So then, okay, so that's probably not going to happen. So then it's like, at least be regular. So at least, you know, you may not go to bed at the right time, but your brain at least has an idea and it's in a rhythm. And there's a lot of evidence that shows even if you have to work nights or whatever it might be, the regularity still provides a lot of benefit. Better to be in sync with the sun, but if you can't be in sync with the sun, better to be regular than not regular.
Yeah, you made a good point. I've been lucky with that, like just falling into the cycle, and as I am where I'm at, and it's totally different from my 20s where it's like, yeah, it's hitting about the certain time and like I'm gonna head to bed. So it's quite nice because then also too I don't have to wake up with an alarm clock. My body I just wake up, which is actually quite nice because that except for when it's time to get on an airplane, then that alarm will definitely be on, if not 2 or 3 of them, just because the stress and the frustration about the potential anxiety of missing a flight. night doesn't bode well for a good night's sleep. But you mentioned something about other people, and I want to just touch base on this. I mean, I'm very fortunate. I don't think I snore. My husband doesn't snore, but there are those people that snore, but then they have a partner that, they love dearly, but they wake them up at night. Like how or what, how can somebody get beyond that? Or there's also, sleep apnea, things like that too. Like, I'm not sure if we were going to leave that to a later section or if you want to address those things now.
Yeah, we can get into it. Just before I answer that, just while I think of it, I want to point out there is a genetic component to this. So we have genetic reports. There is a minority of people, and it is a very small minority, so I almost hesitant to say it because I don't want people to immediately jump on it. But there is a small minority of people who have gene variants that mean that they really are genuinely good with, 5 or 6 hours at night. It's not the majority, and that's why, with Matthew Walker, he'll do his epidemiological studies and say, yeah, well, on average, people are far better off when they have more. But I do believe that there are the genuine exceptions. And we do have genetic reports and genetic insights that can indicate if you are that person. Another thing, just to go back to the regularity thing for a second, there are also people who are more early birds and night owls. And I think that this does make sense from a genetic point of view, that if everyone in a particular, because we used to be tribal for the vast majority of evolution, if everyone was asleep, and let's just say, let's not even talk about other groups of humans. Let's say that all humans slept at night. Who would keep us safe from predators, right? Bears and wolves and lions and all the rest of it. There had to be a minority who would stay awake at night to keep the whole tribe safe. And I think that did end up being coded into the genes. So there is that individual variation as well. Again, I don't think there are as many genuine night owls as genetically as there are people who just act like it. Just like I don't think there's genuinely that many people who can be optimal with only 5 hours sleep, but it does exist genetically. So yeah, back to your point about other people. So this is a tricky one, right? First of all, if people are happy sleeping in the room with other people, great. If they sleep, great. Second of all, if they have no choice, then fair enough, right? And so that's all good. What I think is interesting, though, is people who sleep poorly because they sleep in the room with someone else have an option and then choose not to. And that's where the first 45 minutes of this recording was probably, necessary, because it's saying just how important that issue is. But I think a big blockage for people considering sleeping separately or sleeping on their own is that it shows that there is some, a couple of things. If you're sleeping with a child or a pet, you may feel like they're dependent on you, right? They need you. And so, you don't want to upset them. I'm not a parent, so I'm not going to tell you how to address that. But I would consider, given the amount that a child kind of copies what you do, they're almost more impacted by copying you than they are by how you treat them. So if a lack of sleep is impacting you in all these negative ways, and they're going to model that in their nervous system, then that's something worth considering, long term. But again, I can't give advice about, how to address it. But in terms of the partner thing, I can. So there's this idea. So the other reason that a person might stay sleeping in the room with someone else, even though it keeps waking them up, is because they're like, our relation, this is necessary for our relationship to be healthy. All the research that I've done indicates that throughout most of our history, the only reason that we slept with other people is because we had to. Initially, before we had buildings and all the rest of it, again, it would be for obvious survival things, safety, warmth, right? Generally, with most herds of animals, right? Whoever's in the middle of the herd is the safest. No one wants to be alone. No one wants to be on the outside because that's the most dangerous place to be. So fair enough, right? That's our evolutionary background, a lot of it. And then, then more recently, throughout most of our history, in fact, still the case for a lot of places, we didn't have any choice, right? There's still a lot of places in the world where there's one room to a whole family and they all sleep in the same bed because they have to. And fair enough, right? So there's a lot of doing it because they have to. But then if we look throughout most of our history at the very few people who didn't have to, which would be like the monarchy and the aristocracy, who rightly or wrongly had way more resources than everyone else, they didn't sleep together. They may have over periods occasionally, right, for whatever reason, bonding and sex, but it was not I must do it, otherwise there's a problem with a relationship kind of thing. It was I'll do it because for a reason, right? So and now we're in this, and again, not everyone, probably not the majority of the world, but probably the majority of people watching this, I imagine, will be people who have means, and to some degree, right? They probably have like a room in their house that they could sleep in that no one is already sleeping in, all that kind of stuff. But there's just this psychological block to doing it. And half of it may be genuine, right? So the truth is, as I said, a lot of us feel safer when we're with someone else. And that's the oxytocin thing, oxytocin reducing cortisol. And so if you genuinely feel worse sleeping on your own than with someone else because it's more important for you to be safe than undisturbed, then fair enough. Then, you could ask yourself, is there other ways I could feel safe despite being alone? But the answer may be no. And this, again, depends on how we're wired. Genetically, we are wired differently. And you could argue those same aristocracy and monarchy and stuff, people who, who were happy sleeping alone, they were also, has a genetic tendency to be a little bit more, well, whatever. Not as connected to other humans, let's say. So totally fair enough. But try it. But if you know that you do feel better sleeping alone and you still don't do it because you're worried about what it means for your relationship, something like that, then I would say that's worth questioning, right? There is nothing to say that means there's any issue in the relationship. My wife and I have not slept in the same room, again, except for occasions, for many years. We've been married 12 years now. We're happy with that. It was actually her who initiated it because she was a very light sleeper. She had, issues, and she and so she started sleeping on her own, and great, So for her, she felt better that way, and I agreed. Now again, it may be an issue of you feel better sleeping on your own, but your partner doesn't. So that's more of a tricky thing again. I'm not a relationship therapist, right? You can maybe work that out with them as to how that works. Maybe half the time one of you gets their way, half the time the other. But yeah, it's a bit of a minefield, Krissy.
Yeah, no, I get it. Yeah, the art of compromise and conversation. I don't know if we might need to do a whole episode on this in the sense of things, structured around sleep apnea or snoring. Like what dysfunction or what causes those things?
Yeah, let's do a separate episode on it because it's more of a breathing issue, I would say. I want to do a breathing episode soon.
We'll table that for a later time. So then how can somebody really know if they're getting enough sleep?
Well, these days we do actually have those apps, right? And so, again, because of a tendency to not be able to measure your own function very well, that's where something that is, now they're not perfect, they're not foolproof, they're not always 100% guaranteed to be right, but the third party, like non-biased data from one of those sleep apps with a device, either a watch or a ring, that measures your sleep can be extremely helpful, right? They'll tell you amount you've had of the different types of sleep. They'll also tell you based on like your heart rate variance and your heart rate and your maybe something else, that how recovered you are from your sleep. So some people are against them because of the radiation they're emitting. They're probably not a good idea to use like for the rest of your life for that reason. But in terms of like getting a grip on this and knowing, as you just said, Krissy, like I think personally that they are actually the best possible thing, at least that you can do yourself, possibly the best thing full stop, because even if you go and do a sleep study or something in a hospital, it's a weird environment. It's not normal. So it's not going to be representative of about what, how you normally sleep. So that is one thing. If you do sleep in the same room with someone else, getting feedback from them, so if they're like, oh, I keep hearing you like choking, or, you just talked about sleep apnea, or you kept waking up but you don't remember it, like that feedback can be helpful. Other than that, and as we talked about, this is not 100% reliable by any means, but it's still something. You can ask yourself a few questions like, how refreshed do I feel when I wake up within about 10 minutes, something like that? How do I need any kind of stimulant to have energy during the day? Now, you may need it just because you're habituated to it, like we talked about earlier. But ideally you're not. And if you're habituated to a stimulant, you probably got that way in the first place because of a lack of sleep at some point. So, it's an indication. We talked about memory being a big one, right? If your memory is better than usual, you probably had a good night's sleep. If you have an excellent memory, at least for your age, if people, observe that and compliment you on that, then that can be a good indication. Mood is another big one, So again, we can all kind of fake a mood, just like we can fake energy. But if you need to fake a good mood, well, first of all, okay, so I guess there's different levels of it. If you wake up just feeling joyful and grateful and happy, you probably had a good night's sleep. If you wake up and you can kind of get yourself to that place by, affirmations or meditation or, listening to something motivating or whatever, that's probably a good indicator. If you can't get yourself to that place, that's a decent indicator that you have not slept well. And if the very idea of being happy or grateful fills you with, if you have a more firmly, life is unfair, life sucks, other people suck, I suck, whatever it might be, kind of attitude, then that's a good indicator to me that you haven't slept enough. I mean, simplistic, yeah, but it's kind of hard to fake, right? I would say, and this is the hardest one to judge for yourself, but a realistic attitude towards life, and how can you tell if you have one of those? The amount of time that you hit your head against a brick wall dealing with life, And I have for me, a realistic attitude about life might be, I expect things to be done quicker than they are by me or other people, so I often get frustrated or impatient. That is not a sign of optimal functioning, right? That's a sign I'm being unrealistic. I'm being delusional about how long things should take or whatever. And so that's an indicator for me. The more I'm getting frustrated about that, I'm not being realistic. I'm not living in the real world. Probably haven't had enough dream sleep. For someone else, it may be that they're always, upset, like they're sad that life isn't better than they wish it were. Or for someone else, it's like, life is a scary place, or, I'm a victim, or some people are just confused, right? Oh my God, this has happened. Like everything confuses them. Like all of these are signs of not being connected with reality. And I would, humbly encourage, if you possibly can, circumstances permitting, of course, that you get more, go back to bed if you possibly can, or probably not, just make sure you sleep earlier in future.
Yeah, those are, having a realistic attitude. You're absolutely right. So many times that can perpetuate myself into spaces that I don't necessarily need to go, that aren't very helpful to myself or to those around me at times. So yes, it's a really great distinction on that. Going back into, talking more about sleep, us being able to identify whether we're getting enough and things like that. There, apart from the odd bathroom break because we wake up in the night and we have to go, for those people that find it super easy to fall, well, no, it doesn't matter about whether they find it easy to fall asleep or not fall asleep. It's just about the waking up in the night, and, why does it happen? And why is it sometimes very difficult for people to fall back asleep?
It's a good question. It could be a few different reasons. So like I said, if it keeps happening only between 1 and 3, that could be an indicator of some kind of detoxification thing going on. But, so that aside, I would go back a lot to the previous list, but so the GABA may be too low. Now that you might think, well, but how did I get to sleep in the first place? You may have been exhausted, but then, once you're not exhausted, you don't have enough GABA to keep you asleep. So the way to tell if that's it is if you have racing thoughts. So they may not even necessarily be negative, although they often are, like anxious, but it's like thinking, like the brain is like on full throttle, right? And especially if you wake up with those.
For example, if you wake up in the middle of the night and you're already going through the 10 lists of things that you need to do for the next day.
Exactly. Yes. Now that can also be, so lack of GABA kind of goes along with an excess of stress chemicals, right? So because they counteract each other. So lack of GABA, stroke, excess of stress chemicals, either way. So I'd be working on both of those simultaneously if that's the reason that you wake up. Now, there could be deeper things behind it. There could be trauma. There could be some of the other stuff that we've talked about. But, let's assume it's not that until proven otherwise, right? So again, try and resolve the neurochemical imbalance first. Obviously, if you're waking up because you're in pain, then you're in pain. That's something that needs to be addressed with. If you're waking up because you've got digestive issues, then you've got digestive issues. That's something that needs to be addressed with. If you're waking up with anxiety, now one of the things we talked about before, it could be blood sugar, right? So yes, you could have anxiety because of a neurological habit. Yes, you could have it because of trauma. Yes, you could have it because of your life circumstances, but it might not be any of those things. It might just be that your blood sugar started to get too low, and then your body's like, oh, we need energy, and so it raises cortisol in order to pull more sugar out of storage from the liver and maybe in the muscles. And then that excess stress chemical, especially if you don't have enough GABA to buffer it, will then wake you up. So blood sugar can be a different one. Of course, that has to be dealt with in a different way. We'll do an episode on that soon, so I'll cover that then. But, easy thing. Yeah, no, we'll get to that in a bit. So that could be it. And now, what about if a nightmare wakes you up, right? If a nightmare wakes you up, then that could even be everything I just said. So that could be, there's not a psychological reason. It's just that your stress chemicals were really high because of low blood sugar, because of, imbalance of the chemicals themselves. And so it manifested as a nightmare. Or it could be the tendency to repress feelings during the day that we talked about earlier. And so, of course, that's the whole thing. At night, that layer of repression is gone. The prefrontal cortex is barely active, if at all. And so all of those feelings can come up. And so I would always go for the practical stuff first, we'll talk about, because it's often easier to address. But if none of the practical stuff works, that doesn't mean, I can't, that's it. It's just, okay, it's probably more likely to then be a psychological issue, the stuff that we talked about before. Maybe fear of loss of control, fear of the unconscious, fear of traumas. One we haven't talked about actually but I think is really big that I never see anyone talk about in this space is guilt. Like a conscience. That's definitely woken me up before. And so this is in fact, because I am fairly on top of the other things, I think this is one of the only times that I'll wake up and not be able to get back to sleep, is if my conscience is really bothering me, either because of what I've done that I'm guilty of, or because of something that someone's done to me that I'm bothered about, that I haven't addressed. And so in that case, the resolution is going to be to actually address that issue, right? Possibly with that personal situation, but at least within you, So, you maybe feel guilty and it's too late, the person's already dead or whatever, but you can, if you're religious, you can go to confession or whatever the equivalent is, ask for absolution, ask for penance, ask for forgiveness. And if you're more, psychological, you can talk to a therapist about it, you can process it, you can work it through. But I think that is often an issue, guilt or shame, or anger and resentment about something that someone has done to you. So, of course, it could also be fear and trauma and, oh my God, so something that someone's done to you that you might be, they could do it again. It could happen again, right? So, I guess it's the full gamut. But I think the fear one is more obvious because of nightmares and stuff like that. The guilt one is less obvious. But it's kind of a cliche. It's like, how do you sleep at night, right? So they say to some, evil, CEO of a company that's polluted and killed loads of people or whatever. And it's like, so it's that idea of guilt will keep you up at night. And I think it's especially, it may be something that stops you sleeping, but I think it's much more common actually that it will show up when you're ready to sleep, that it will wake you up. Because again, people who do that kind of stuff, either, people who repress these strong feelings, whether it's, stuff you've done or stuff that other people have done to you, often that repression is quite fixed. And so it's only once you're already asleep and the unconscious mind starts processing, then it will start coming up. And then it may, come into your conscious awareness. But it may not. You may just wake up with a to-do list, as you said, Krissy, or whatever. But the thing that's really behind it is, some kind of deep-seated resentment, guilt, something like that. So again, I wouldn't start with that stuff. I would start with all the practical stuff that's easier to deal with. But if none of that, if you've already heard all that stuff before and tried it, this is why I always want to give people root, solutions, then that may be where we need to go to.
Yeah, thank you for that. It's that's been part of my journey, is being able to fall back asleep. So, it's hard to know exactly what the actual cause is of it. Sometimes you might not necessarily know, but I know your recommendations have really helped me along the way. So I'm grateful for that. So that's what I'm going to, bring to our listeners now, as well as your recommendations. So Elwin, how do we restore deep regenerative sleep?
Excellent. Well, I would start with the practical stuff, and that's exactly what I said to you, right, Krissy? And I'm glad, that it's worked to some degree. So practical stuff. Before bed, focus on silence, or if you want to have those constant noises that helps you get to sleep, as I said, fine as a second place if the alternative is, intermittent noise. But silence is always best if possible. No blue light. You can be as strict on that as you want. Probably the more that you need to be strict, the more you should be strict, right? Maybe an hour before bed, 2 hours before bed, 3 hours before bed, whatever. Cool environment, right? If you're hot, that will absolutely stop you going to sleep, or other things being equal. This can actually save money on heating bills and stuff like that. So that's one benefit as well. I'm a big fan, especially in winter and stuff like that, of have the room pretty cool, but then you can still, have like warm bedding and stuff like that. So, but I think that's ideal. I think there's something about breathing cool air. I think that's the difference. So even, in the summer when there's no saving of money, I would still prefer to keep the room cool and have a reasonable amount of bedding. But maybe that's my personal preference. But anyway, somehow or another, your body's got to cool down. Some people like to do a cold bath and shower. That sometimes works, sometimes doesn't. It does stimulate stress chemicals. If you have a fast COMT, this is my theory, then you can clear away those stress chemicals quickly, get to sleep. But if you have a slow COMT, maybe that will actually keep you awake longer. So the only way to know for sure is to try it. Some people do really good on that, cold something and then go to bed. Fresh, pure air. I wouldn't say only fresh air, because we talked about that before. Like opening windows may mean adding noise. So an air purifier may be a better option for you. You got to balance those two, against each other. No stimulants. I mean, really in general, but I know most people won't listen to that. Like I personally, don't use stimulants, except for maybe the stuff that you could describe as a stimulant I've talked about in previous episodes, but not really. But if you're going to do them, just earlier in the day, right? I think, some people these days talk about it's not good to have caffeine as soon as you wake up, and I can understand the logic behind that as well. But something like 2 or 3 hours after you wake up, and then not again, would be ideal if you are going to do stimulants. Alcohol is just as bad in terms of its effect on sleep as caffeine. In fact, now alcohol massively increases GABA, which you would think would be helpful. And in fact, this is why a lot of people drink before they go to sleep, because it does seem to help with sleep. The problem is that although it does shut down significantly the activity of that prefrontal cortex, which can help you sleep, especially if overthinking is the thing stopping you falling asleep, it also, because of the amount of poison, like, alcohol being turned into aldehyde, is going to massively impact the quality of the sleep you get. So generally, that's the idea. It may help you get to sleep, but it ruins the quality of your sleep. And this is true of most of the sleeping medications that are out there as well, like even more so that for those medications, that a lot of them, they're called hypnotics, meaning they don't actually really help you sleep. They just put you into such a disassociated state that you fall asleep, but they're not leading to quality sleep. They're just knocking out your conscious mind, if that distinction makes sense. So it's more like a passing out thing. It's not leading to deep restorative sleep. It can, in some situations, being better than nothing. I'm not, judging anyone on that, but as a long-term solution, it's not great because it's not really helping you to make that restorative sleep. Food, we touched on that already. The general consensus these days is don't eat for several hours before sleep. I think in an ideal world, that is accurate because it means that your body is not trying to digest, which is an energy intensive process, at the same time it's trying to sleep. So we have these kind of anabolic stroke catabolic systems in our body. Anabolic means to build up, catabolic means to tear down. Sleep, you actually want to be a catabolic time, ideally. You want the body to be recycling old cells, getting rid of them, replacing them. You want it to be tearing down during the night, so then you can build it back up during the, maybe later in the night and then during the day. But in some cases, especially if a person has a blood sugar issue, it can be really beneficial to eat not long before sleep. So the other thing is, if you're a person with a high metabolism, either because you've optimized it like we talked about, or because you've you do a lot of training and stuff like that, then sometimes you just need to eat not long before sleep because it keeps that metabolism burning. So again, that's a big indicator for that is if you're overweight at all, you probably, the only reason that you would eat before sleep is to keep your blood sugar balanced. Like, that's not helping you otherwise. It's very beneficial to not eat. And I think that's why it's general advice, because most people are overweight these days. So it's good general advice. But if you are underweight especially, or if you are trying to hold on weight for, as I said, athletic purposes or whatever, then eating before sleep may actually be a good idea. All right, in terms of actual stuff, GABA support. So we talked about this recently, but I'll say it again quickly. L-theanine is good, which is an amino acid, which helps to increase GABA and calm down that prefrontal cortex activity. L-glycine is good, which is another neurotransmitter, which is very similar to GABA in terms of being a calming, inhibiting both amino acid and neurotransmitter. And then pregnenolone, I've talked about in a different episode, the episode we did on feel-good neurochemicals. I will not go into detail about that again because it's complicated, but check out that episode if you need something a bit more powerful that helps with GABA. And we've talked about generally GABA is going to be better in someone who has optimal levels of testosterone and progesterone. So getting your hormones in the right place. Again, complicated topic that we talked about a lot in those previous episodes. Supporting melatonin. So you can just, take melatonin quite simply. This is kind of a little bit controversial. Some people say it's a good idea, some people's not. I think in theory, research-wise, a normal dose of melatonin, there's very little evidence that it causes any kind of significant issues. But because it is a hormone, it's one of the few hormone supplements that is just a supplement. There's no restrictions around it. In our countries, although there's many countries around the world actually where it is treated like a drug that you have to get from a doctor. I think the reason why it's not treated like a drug is because you can have like way more than it says, and it's perfectly safe. It won't kill you. But I would really leave this down to your personal experience. So if you take it, helps you sleep, and it doesn't leave you groggy the next day, great. If it does, then you may need to consider alternatives. But I'm not against it at all. We talked about how important sleep is. So anything that helps you genuinely deeply sleep, which melatonin absolutely can do, can be really, really great. There's a bunch of herbs that also help to some degree, like lemon balm and passion flower, and they tend to work by, increasing GABA, sometimes melatonin, reducing stress chemicals. We do have a product in Fuyang called Sleep Aid that has a lot of these ingredients in it, not the pregnenolone because that's a hormone, but a lot of the others like melatonin. So we talked about reducing stress chemicals, especially cortisol. My favorite for that is ashwagandha. Ashwagandha also helps to improve GABA. Ashwagandha also helps to improve dopamine in general. It has loads of other benefits, so I'm a big fan of that. I personally like to have it every night before sleep because I want to have it at some point during the day, and I'll have it at night when it's the most potentially helpful. And then berberine is another thing that I've been having these days, and I've been having it at night to help keep my blood sugar regulated at night, which I think is a good idea. I'm still testing to see if it actually works for me in terms of lab results, but experientially it's good so far. So berberine is my top recommendation for blood sugar balance. It really is fantastically effective. If your issue is if your issue is high blood sugar, which is a more advanced case of blood sugar dysregulation, it's very effective as that. But it's also good for much pre those issue like insulin resistance. It helps to actually increase insulin sensitivity of the cells, as well as keeping blood sugar balanced. So actually has loads of other benefits for cardiovascular health and digestion and all kinds of stuff. So I'm a big fan of berberine as well. To me, I think maybe we want to do an episode of this soon, Krissy, just like a few supplements that almost anyone would benefit from, maybe. I think that might be interesting. But anyway, berberine is one of them. And it's one of those things you may, you're just pushing your product out and stuff to do it sleep. Sure, maybe. But what I'm saying is it might be worth a try if, especially if you suspect blood sugar, if you wake up feeling hungry, or if you notice that you do actually sleep better if you eat just before you go to sleep, those are great indicators that blood sugar is an issue. And then berberine, definitely should be a contender for something to try, I would say. So in general, movement and exercise during the day. So I think one of the reasons why we really struggle with sleep, now more than as far as we know we did before, is because of our sedentary lifestyles, right? So we haven't really done an episode on this yet either, but as much as there's voluminous evidence how beneficial sleep is, there's voluminous evidence how beneficial exercise is. But, there is some evidence as well that, there is definitely evidence that too much exercise is not a good thing. And I think exercise depends on the person. So what I notice with exercise is people often go from barely moving to then going to the gym and, they're sweating and their heart is racing and they're trying to push themselves way too hard. What I personally observe makes me healthiest is just moving throughout the day. And, it's one of the things I feel I miss about when I used to do more manual labor, when I was on my feet all day and picking stuff up and moving stuff around. Like, it absolutely improves digestion, I found, and it absolutely does improve sleep. So, okay, Owen, but how do I implement that? Well, whenever there's a choice, right? So there's a choice like, could I walk there rather than drive or get a ride? Like whenever I'm on the phone, if I'm not in front of a camera like I am now, I'm always on my feet and walking around when I do my calls, right? Rather than sitting down like most people, I believe, would be, right? So it's taking those, even if you have an office job, it's taking those opportunities, like to always ask yourself, could I be doing this while moving around as opposed to sat still? And more than you may think, in a lot of cases, the answer is actually yes, you could do. And so to move around as much as possible, and yes, exercise as well. And definitely there's loads of evidence about the benefits of exercise. But what I'm kind of saying is, if you're like sat down like 12 hours a day, then that half an hour at the gym or whatever, I think you're better off moving 6 hours a day and not going to the gym. And there's a lot of evidence for that. Like, we're designed to walk several hours a day. Walking really is one of the best exercises. Now, of course, biohacking, optimizing next level. Should you be doing some kind of resistance training? Should you be doing some kind of high intensity training? Yes, absolutely. But I'm saying just as I don't think that should be your only movement during the day, and I would prefer that you start with walking and basic movements for as many hours as possible during the day. It's actually way more beneficial. And going back to this sleep thing, it's way more conducive to sleep.
I hope you're enjoying this episode. I just need to take a moment to quickly tell you about a way that you can support the podcast by getting high quality, affordable supplements that Elwin and I personally use, and that's Feel Younger. What I love about Feel Younger is they have great quality products with minimal fillers, but the prices are very affordable. You can call their customer support team 20 hours a day, 7 days a week, and in my experience, they're really helpful and friendly. And what I love most of all is the amazing descriptions Elwin's written for each product category about that topic. There's so much information and education on it. I've actually learned more from reading their product descriptions than I have from most articles. So, to support the podcast, please use Feel Younger for all your supplement needs. And to let them know we sent you, you can use promo code RejuvenateMe for a 20% discount off your first order at feelyounger.net. That's 20% off your first order with promo code RejuvenateMe at feelyounger.net. Now, you make a wonderful, excellent point. That was one of my things is, when the kids were younger and when we lived in the UK, I walked them to school every day, as I took them to school, picked them up, brought them home, so there was a lot of movement, especially with young kids. But now they're a lot older, so I just found myself so, just at the desk working constantly. So I got one of those pedometers or, something that track my, overall steps during the day, because I saw my mom and dad with them. I was like, well, actually, let me test this because I know that's going to make a massive impact, and there was days I was absolutely surprised how little I moved. So it gave me that impetus to get up and move more.
It's a great idea to actually measure it again. Yeah. And did you see any correlation between the amount and how well you slept or not yet?
And not yet. I mean, it was one of those things, there's so much, but what I definitely found, which I noticed too, was when I moved more, the amount of stress I felt physically in the body, or the ability of the body to relax more or let go a little bit more, was a lot better when I had done a lot more steps.
Absolutely. Yeah, so that leads me to my almost last section here, which is, actually addressing the trauma in the body, right? And the trauma, when we say trauma in the body, it's the same as the trauma in your subconscious or unconscious mind, right? The body really is the unconscious mind from a functional point of view, even if not necessarily from a technical, scientific point of view. And so I believe that a lot of people I know make fun of people who don't move and don't exercise. They're like, oh, lazy or whatever. But I kind of feel like calling someone lazy because they don't exercise, exercising is something that we just, moving is something that we just take joy in doing. As you said, you had kids, Krissy. You remember, with kids, the hardest thing is not to get them to exercise. I don't know, maybe it's different these days with the devices, but the hardest thing is normally to get them to stay still, right? They constantly want to move. Is that right? Small kids. Yeah. Before they're indoctrinated and, whatever. So that's natural. So if I come across a person who doesn't want to move, I don't think, oh, you're lazy. In the same way that if I find someone who doesn't want to eat, I don't think, oh, you're too lazy to eat. Because to me, moving is as innate and organic and natural as eating. And so there are people who don't want to eat and there are people who don't want to move, but I see that as a sign of something being wrong, not just laziness, if that makes sense. So I won't address the whole why would you not eat thing at the moment, but if I address the whole why would you not move thing, I think there's a few reasons and they're all, valid and genuine. One of them is that you're in pain when you move, right? Or more pain. And we've talked about that already in the chronic pain episode. But I think another one is that when you move, it stirs up feelings, right? There's that Tony Robbins phrase of emotion comes from motion, which sounds a bit cheesy, but there's some truth to it, right? And so if that's true, if emotion comes from motion, then you could say that lack of emotion comes from lack of motion. So when we don't want to feel, when there's feelings that we have inside, and again, functionally, we could say it's in the body, but maybe they're actually in the brain, but whatever. When we have feelings somehow stored away in us that we don't want to address or we're not even aware of, right? So some unconscious part of us doesn't want to address them. Then when we move, those feelings start to come up. And so, as you said, Krissy, you got a pretty healthy attitude to it because you're like, helps me process them, right? And then I'm less stressed, I'm less anxious. But for someone who's maybe less willing to face any of those feelings coming up, like even just the idea of moving at all becomes something that they'd rather avoid. And so that's why, like, I really like modalities that help to break through that really encourage you to move to get the feelings flowing. And this is not necessarily to create any kind of catharsis or not to make you cry or shout or anything like that. There can be massive progress without any real expression of emotion, but it's just to allow you to feel the emotion again through moving. So, Reichian therapy and bioenergetics, I've talked about many times before. Again, I want to interview someone with that soon for the podcast. But they're really, really great, both kind of as exercise. I mean, they get your heart moving and your lungs and stuff like that. But more than that, it's really allowing you to start feeling these feelings again and becoming aware of your body again. Now, there's also things like EMDR and EFT that are the most, how would you say, like probably scientifically validated modalities out there that really help to address trauma in at least slightly physical way. So EMDR is eye movements and then EFT is tapping. And so again, it's kind of addressing the body. In Reiki therapy, we work on all kinds of muscles, but we say that the eyes are one of the two most important sets of muscles when it comes to repressing feelings. So it makes sense that EMDR is so effective that it actually helps, it works. And the funny thing is, as someone who's had some experience of EMDR, what you notice is when you do it, and it's just really looking back and forth on the simplest possible level, is after a while you feel really tired and you feel really ready to sleep, So I actually used to do it, and I'm not saying you should do this without oversight of a professional, because it can also bring up trauma and all kinds of horrible feelings. But I actually used to do it just to get to sleep at night. After a while, once the main traumas, I guess, were processed. And so, therapy, whether it's formal therapy, whether it's talking to, a spiritual counselor, a religious leader, a friend, but a non-judgmental friend, a non-judgmental family member, like someone who you can just talk to about how you feel, that can also help, to sleep better. So it's the traumas that are in our body, traumas that are need to be expressed. They can can really help you to sleep, to deal with both of those. I talked earlier about maybe guilt or shame about something you've done, or maybe you have resentment or anger towards someone that you don't know how to express to them. So to talk to someone else about that can be really beneficial. But again, often it can be limited benefit if that's all you do. So still moving, and the key really seems to be to feel the feelings in your body. And it's because it creates that connection between the body and the brain. And so talking about it can be helpful. Sometimes it isn't, but consistently feeling the feeling in your body by doing this body-based work does seem to be really impactful in many cases. And that'll bring me to my last recommendation. This is one that I, again, never see talked about as a recommendation for sleep, but to me it's the most obvious thing in the world. So I'll say it. I'm not sure if I've said this to you before, Krissy. And it's meditation. So first of all, when you do a regular practice of meditation at the times you should be doing it, like for instance, first thing in the morning, it will help with everything I just said. It will help with processing those feelings. It will help to, increase that awareness of the body. It will help to process those traumas. Meditation seems to be a really good, surrogate, replacement, supplement maybe for REM sleep. So it really helps you to process stuff. Now, meditation, a lot of people mean a lot of different things by it, and there's obviously various types. But what I mean is it's where, first of all, you remove all distractions, right? Guided meditations can be good, but I kind of don't think that they're actually meditation. I think they're more something else. But when I say meditation, I mean removing all distraction and just focusing on something. So it might be focusing on your breath, might be focusing on a specific point in your body. It might be focusing on, some concepts, some nothing at all. It might be focusing on a mantra. It might be focusing on a yantra, which is a visual thing that you look at with your eyes, whatever. But it's like remove distractions, focus on something, right? Mindfulness meditation is very popular, and that's usually just focus on your breath or try to focus on nothing at all, right? Now, why is that so beneficial? Because again, it kind of gets you into the state where you get more connection with the unconscious. And then a lot of time when people try and meditate, they don't think they're succeeding because all these thoughts and feelings come up. Oh, I got to do this. And oh, this thing happened. And I'm upset about this. And I'm worried about this. And blah, blah. But actually that process is kind of like the REM sleep process. You're actually processing and allowing those things to be dealt with. And I remember listening to one kind of business guru guy, but general guru guy called Naval, who said, you need like at least 100 hours of meditation where you just sit there and allow whatever thoughts to come up. And that's just your body processing stuff. That's like you having a chance to think about all that stuff that you've been repressing all that time, right? So ironically, if you try and think about it, often you can't, but if you try and meditate, then all the thoughts will come up. Well, so that's great. But that's something, as I said, that can be a while before you really get the benefit of that when it comes to sleep. But here's how to get the benefit quickly. A lot of the time, basically, almost everyone who teaches meditation says, don't do it lying down. You have to do it sitting up, sometimes even standing. Why do you have to do it sitting up rather than standing? Standing rather than lying down? Because if you do it lying down, you'll probably fall asleep. Now, I looked at that and thought, if I have to meditate sitting up, and it was true, if I did it lying down, often I did fall asleep. But I'm like, why not do it when I want to fall asleep? And I could not come up with any good reason why not. And so to me, this is the most effective method of falling asleep at all. And because there is a psychological element to this. And one of the reasons why I was reluctant, and we ended up doing it, but spend a long time about why you should sleep, is because people get into this psychological thing like, oh God. And and you're up at, again, I know a lot of people might end up watching this at 3 a.m. or something, like, oh my God, I'm going to get up in 4 hours and I might die. And he said there's a 20% increased chance that I'll die. And like getting into all this, and I need to sleep and I must sleep. And of course, because the act of sleep is the act of surrendering, the more you want to try and do it, the more you like, dopamine is that goal orientation, right? Dopamine is not a sleep chemical. So the more you have the goal of falling asleep, the less you're going to be able to fall asleep. So I would say, do not have the goal of falling asleep. Have the goal of meditating for an hour. Have the goal of spending a whole hour just being aware of your breath. Or a whole hour just being aware of, like in Taoism, they talk often about focusing on the navel, or in yoga, it's about focusing on this part, the third eye, or whatever, right? But pick one thing and stick with it. If you keep jumping around, then that's distracting, right? So have an intention of focusing on one thing, or like I try and just focus on like silence. And it's obviously that only works if you're in a silent environment, but sometimes I'll use earplugs or something to support that. But like the sound of silence itself. And then another thing you can focus on, and this only works this only really works if you're not in pain. But if you're not in pain, focus on just the sensations of your body, which is the same thing, as we said, of focusing on your unconscious mind. If you're focusing on only the sensations of your body, or your breath, or a specific part of your body, you're quickly creating that connection with your unconscious mind. And one of two things will happen if you're lying down comfortably and you've done all the other stuff I've said. Probably. You'll either fall asleep, that's the most likely thing, in which case, congratulations, you've fallen asleep, or you'll do an actual hour of actual real meditation, which is actually better than sleep and really, really, really hard to achieve. So you probably won't achieve that. Hey, maybe you'll even be enlightened, while you're trying to get to sleep. But you probably won't. You'll probably just fall asleep. But that's what you want. Now, there is a third option. This is why I said probably. It's possible that your mind will really resist this. It might, suddenly this pain might show up in your body, or discomfort, or itching, or whatever. Sometimes you'll have even more anxious thoughts, racing thoughts. Sometimes you'll suddenly become upset. Oh, this person was supposed to do this. And Now, if that happens, you have one of two options. The best thing you can do, according to everyone again who teaches meditation, is stick with it, because that won't go on forever, right? Like there will be a time when all that is spent, and then you'll have done what maybe years of therapy or whatever might not have managed. Like that process of every time you just become aware, oh my God, I'm getting upset again. Let me go back to focusing on my breath or my body or whatever. Or, oh, I'm starting to think about what I need to do again. Let me go back to focusing on my breath or body or whatever. That process is immensely beneficial. It's putting in place new neural circuits. It's actually helping you process that upset, all that, whatever is going on inside you. It's really beneficial. So if you have that going on, that's really, really good for your brain and body. Worst case scenario is you go, all right, then I need to do some other kind of biochemical intervention and then try again. Maybe I need to go and have a small snack. Maybe I need to take something that boosts GABA or melatonin. Maybe I need to take something that reduces cortisol. Maybe I need to cool down a little bit. Something like that. Something that we've already talked about, right? Maybe I need to do a little bit of, calm breathing beforehand. The heart coherence breathing I've talked about before, where you basically do 5 breaths a minute, roughly 1 breath every 12 seconds, deep into the belly, deep out of the belly. 5-6 breaths a minute, that puts your heart into coherence, something like that, and then go back to it, right? Again, every single thing is beneficial here. Like if you do that strategy, and I don't know why most people do not do this, again, probably because the real reason why they're not sleeping is because they want to avoid something in their unconscious. That's the only reason I can think of why you wouldn't do this, because this is basically, we just recorded dental health before this. I don't know when this is going to be released, but I said, one of the things of dental health is if you have an area of inflammation, what's totally counterintuitive, but what I was taught by my hygienist and dentist is you actually want to dig into it. You want to dig into it with one of those incidental brushes or one of those little brushes and like really get into that area between the gums of the teeth, because there's probably some thing of irritating it there, which is causing the inflammation, maybe infection, maybe pain, and all the rest of it. It's actually exactly the same with your consciousness. If there's something bothering you that's stopping you sleeping, if it's not something physical, remember we started with all the physical stuff first, but if there's something bothering you, then actually digging in there to find out what it is and getting it out is the best thing you can do. And the best way to do that is what I've just said. Either the body work, or if you're talking about it's actually coming up right before you get to sleep, try and meditate. And that will... as I said, it'll go one of two ways. Most likely you'll just fall asleep, which is congratulations, word. But that's actually the worst case scenario. The best case scenario is that you come face to face with the very thing that's keeping you up in the first place. The anxiety and whatever. I mean, it happened to me not that long ago. Like something was keeping me up, and then I was like, oh my God, I'm afraid about this thing might happen. And I was like, that's great to be aware of that, because now I can actually start doing stuff to make sure it doesn't. And so, because I was avoiding that, I was like, I just want to stay positive. And I was like avoiding this thing that I was afraid of. And then it started impacting my sleep. Then I became aware of it. Then I started addressing it rather than avoiding it. Then I resolved the issue. Then, of course, I can sleep again. Do you see what I mean? So, like, that's the other element of it is, maybe it's not some old trauma or some old thing. Maybe your brain is actually trying to tell you something that you don't want to hear. And the only time that your defenses are down is while you're asleep. And that's why it's waking you up. It's waking you up to tell you something. So that's the other option.
Our body, you mentioned it earlier, our body is our subconscious mind, and it's its job to keep us safe and make us aware of things potentially that are keeping us from that optimization or, from getting to that ultimate goal that we want to do. So it's going to speak to us. It might not be in the most, how should I say this, in the way that we want it to, but it definitely, wakes us up and makes us pay attention.
I wouldn't jump to that, right? I always prefer, let's start with it's just a biochemical issue. Let's just reduce stress chemicals, increase GABA, play around with a few other things, cool the room, whatever. But if all of that doesn't work, and if you're watching this, I'm assuming you may have tried all that stuff and it hasn't worked. And you're like, well, what else? I don't want to tell you the same as everyone else. I will, because it works a lot of times, but I will also tell you what no one else seems to be telling you that if that stuff doesn't work, there's a reason for it, and this is it.
No, thank you for that. And then that also brings me to this other potential thing that I wanted to discuss with you is the things that people are ingesting that they may not feel is the connection for their lack of poor sleep, which would be caffeine. I know, the how caffeine and adenosine interact, because adenosine is meant to accumulate in the body and the brain throughout the day. And that accumulation is what signals us to fall asleep. And so what caffeine does is it takes the place on that adenosine receptor. So then we just feel those stress chemicals. But, people are like, yeah, caffeine, I'm getting it for my energy and things like that. But when it's inhibiting that adenosine signal, what is that impact for people, over time, really, and their sleep quality?
Yeah, you're absolutely right. And so, adenosine is both an ingredient of ATP. It's the A in ATP. So it's actually an ingredient in energy, but it is also something that as it builds up in the day, they call it an inhibitory neurochemical. And so if you call it inhibitory, caffeine sounds kind of good. Like it stops the inhibition. Well, we don't want inhibition. That sounds great. But of course, GABA is also inhibitory. What it means is it's inhibiting energy, but you don't want a lot of energy. As we said, sleep, you want your metabolism to slow down. You want to be cooler. You want to be producing less energy because you're in a like recovery rather than an output state. So yeah, over time, not only does that have the impact of obviously making us less able to sleep because we have less of that inhibitory chemical, but we also have a less ATP. That's my understanding of it. I've heard different perspectives on this, but this is my understanding and this is my experience. And so when you have less ATP, you need more caffeine. So the people who are most vociferously defending caffeine and saying that's not true will be people who are utterly dependent on caffeine. That's my experience. So I'd say, okay, if you don't believe me, remove all the caffeine for a month and then we'll talk, that's, so on a practical level, absolutely. It makes you dependent on it, not just through the usual down regulation kind of aspect, but also through the aspect of making you less efficient at producing ATP.
Thank you for going over that, because I get some people, but I just love it for the taste and this and that, and I'm like, yeah, I know,
Decaf.
Well, decaf still does have some caffeine in it.
It has some, and it has all the theobromine, it has all the theophylline, but it still will have less.
At least it'll have less. It's like, let's do better now. We know better.
And better than that would be dandelion coffee. A lot of the people who try that with, especially the roasted grounds type, not the instant type, it's actually a really good substitute for coffee. It's even, to me, I find it stimulating. I'm sure anyone who's used to coffee will not find it stimulating. It's probably incredibly mild, but it has a tiny, I don't think it's ever been researched what it's got in it that's slightly stimulating. I don't think it's caffeine. It's probably something else. But it's, in terms of taste and like experience of putting it in your French press or your filters or whatever, it's all exactly the same.
Yeah, no, it's because as well, it's like, that's why I also, talk to people about keep the habit, just replace it with something that is going to help you, get to that goal of what you want. And for me, I know it was, better quality sleep, deeper sleep.
Yep. Absolutely.
And then, so you mentioned it earlier. We talked about it just briefly. The value people put on sleep of like, oh yeah, that bravado of I only had 3 hours sleep and look at everything that I've done. When we have that value, or when we're getting minimal sleep, how can we help change somebody's perception, or what that perception, how it potentially impacts, not in a positive way? Can you talk about that a little bit?
Yeah, as I said, I think there's, the practical element of it. And we talked about it quite a lot at the beginning of this episode. But like I said, Dr. Matthew Walker's book is probably a great one for that. To be honest, I don't think he does a fantastic amount of explaining like how to improve sleep or even what causes poor sleep like we've done this episode. But he does a great job of convincing you that sleep is really, really important. So from that level, it's, fantastically helpful. And for many people, I guess that's all they need, right? They just need to realize how important it is and stop depriving themselves of it, and they're all good. So, I think the work he's doing is fantastic. But as I said, I would give it like another level of that, which is to realize kind of the stuff we talked about later in the episode, which is that when you sleep, you're connecting with, depending on your, philosophical stroke religious stroke spiritual bent, you're connecting with your true self. You're connecting with God. You're connecting with the source of consciousness. You're like, so when you sleep less, you are literally like, and you're less connected with God. You're less connected with your true self. You're less connected with, the source of all that is. So does that sound like a good idea? To me, it's as simple as that. And so that's why, these things, they all it all sounds maybe good in theory, as I may not have explained that very well, but people can look it up, whether that is a thing out there, a belief out there, and you'll find that it is. And so when people talk about, that, okay, so that's good in theory, but it's not knowing that in theory. It's like when you wake up after 4 or 5 hours and you've got that list in your brain about what needs to be done, right? And you remember, I could do the meditation like Elwin said and try and fall asleep, or meditate, either way, it's good. But then there's part of you that doesn't want to do it, right? And then realizing that resisting doing it, resisting being in touch with your unconscious, is like resisting being connected with your greater self, with your godhood, with your, or at least connection to godhood, there's literally nothing more important. So when people are like, oh, you're sleeping 8-9 hours, you're sleeping a day away, you're sleeping a life away, I'm like, what is more important than that? What's more important than connecting with your true self or connecting to God? I can't think of anything. I'm not saying that you want to sleep all the time, because obviously, God or our true self, or if you want to call it, wants us to have this incarnated experience. But to minimize that time that we go back and have that refreshing experience of merging again with oneness, merging with our true self, merging with God, to reduce that artificially, just to me, it seems like a no thank you. Unless you have to, right? As I said, I'm not someone's dependent on you, someone's forcing you. I'm not like trying to make anyone feel bad who doesn't have a choice. But I'm saying if you don't have a choice, you want to aim to get to the point where you do have a choice. And if you do have a choice, choose love. Choose your true self. Don't choose your to-do list over your connection with spirit.
Yeah, that's a good point. Thank you. Today, there's one other thing that popped up was night sweats. What causes those? Because that can also disturb somebody's restful night's sleep and wake up completely drenched.
Totally. Yeah. So as I said earlier, like, you should be cool during sleep time. So if you're waking up with night sweats, I'm assuming it's not practical, meaning it's not like that, the heating suddenly kicked in, you've got a heavy duvet and it's just really hot in the room. So I'm assuming you mean not that. So what's going on there is like your body's not happy and it's trying to deal with something. So your body raises your core temperature in the face of an infection, first and foremost, right? In the extreme, that's called a fever. But even so, and of course, it may be a fever that is waking you up. But there's like again, the medical establishment always talks about things in kind of black and white terms, like either yes or no. But in reality, it's more like a dial where it's slowly going up, right? So this is, to me, like, night sweats are often just the body's raised the temperature to either try and fight something off, some kind of chronic infection maybe, or as much as your body will raise your temperature and your metabolism to fight something off, the other reason it will do it is to deal with some kind of poison, right? So it can be part of some kind of detoxification process. And of course, a lot of the time they go hand in hand. One of the things that's bad about pathogenic organisms is the amount of toxins that they release into your system, like endotoxin, which your body has to deal with. So often it's both. So that's what I would see it as a sign of. I would say if you get them more than occasionally, then I would, look into all the stuff we've talked about in the detoxification episode. And we haven't really done a chronic infections episode, except for the mouth, I guess. The oral health is the only one that we've done so far. But even that could be it, right? It could be gum infection that's causing that. Like, for some reason, it's not actually necessarily a sign of ill health. If your body has the energy and strength to fight off an infection by raising a temperature, that's not the only time that's a bad thing is if it raises the temperature so much that it becomes dangerous. But generally, it's a sign of a healthy body if it is able to raise the temperature to fight something off. And of course, in terms of sweating, it's a method of detoxification, as we talked about in the detoxification episode. So it's either your body trying to raise the core temperature to deal with the infection, or it's your body raising the core temperature to sweat because that's what it wants to do to kick out some kind of toxicity through the sweat. That's my understanding. Or, and sorry, just to add one, like less likely is it's a dysregulation of the autonomic nervous system. It could be a sign of something serious, like I won't name any medical names, but where things are really seriously dysregulated. So, check it with your doctor if it's more than occasional. Everything I just said is if your doctor doesn't have any answers.
Yeah, for sure. Check out the episode on detoxification. That was really good, and it gave a lot of answers and information on quite a few things to check out in case you think that is that. I do want to ask, as people age, they do tend to, well, I do hear this a little bit that, they need less sleep. So can you talk to us about that? Does that ever really happen? Do we ever need less sleep?
Yeah, I've heard that loads. And I mean, it's almost ubiquitous. I don't think, I used to work in a retirement home, so I spent a lot of time around elderly people. And these are people, the average age was like 86 or something like that. These are people who already had lived longer than the average age of dying. And they were in a retirement home, not a nursing home. So they're still just about able to look after themselves. So these are really the healthiest people you can get. And yet their level of sleep was 5-6 hours at the most usually, and they all talked about it. Like they said, the older you get, the less that you are able to sleep, and some of them also have the belief that the less that you need to sleep. So in terms of that second point, again, Matthew Walker's done great research in this regard, and he has proven very conclusively the need for sleep does not go down at all as you get older. So that's a myth, but it's a myth based on the fact that people get less sleep. So this is back to the reference ranges thing that we've talked about so often.
Those lovely reference ranges.
So, so often they go, oh, what's normal? Oh, well, that's, you want to have the same as everyone else. So what's normal is to sleep less as you get older. That doesn't mean it's good. And in fact, as I said, he's done loads of research on that to discover that it is not good. And that, yes, you do tend to get less and less sleep as you get older, but you also tend to get less and less healthy as you get older. And that the two are, in fact, correlated. Now, the way that he describes it is that getting less sleep as you get older and getting less healthy as you get older, they go hand in hand. So it's not simple, like one causes the other. It's not like, it's just lack of sleep that then causes all the health issues. But it's not as simple as to say that the health issues cause lack of sleep, but it is true to say that both are true and that they're interdependent. And so whenever you have an interdependent cycle where two things kind of fall simultaneously, it often is the case that if you can raise one, it will raise the other as well, at least to some degree. And so, of course, you want to work on both. As you work on all other aspects of health, as we've talked about in other episodes, you should be able to sleep better. And then as you work on sleeping better, all other areas of health will improve. It's really, as tied together and in a way as simple as that. I think this, we talked a lot about how sleep is impacted by emotional issues and traumas and guilt and blah, blah, blah. Well, I think that there's something that's noticed anecdotally among a lot of people that I don't think has really been proven yet. Maybe we'll get a Matthew Walker of this. And it's the impact of emotions on health, right? How often it's when people are upset, when people have some kind of major upset, that then their health deteriorates and declines, And, Alexander Lowen talks a lot about this, but it's all anecdotal, right? Oh, this person, they got their heart broken by someone divorced them, or they lost their job or something, and then their health rapidly went downhill. I think that one of the reasons for it is because, this is my opinion, the trauma, the negativity affects the sleep, and then the sleep affects health. I think it is that way round. So I think that is the mechanism whereby a lot of the time emotionally difficult experiences, upsets, will lead to a significant downward trend in someone's health, possibly even death, right? And I've had it happen in my own personal life and my family that, there's this like upset and then the person just dies not long afterwards. And I think that's the mechanism whereby it happens. And so, again, I'm not trying to scare anyone if that's like your situation, but the good news about that is resolve the sleep, resolve the upset, it's going to be better. If the upset feels too much to bear to resolve, then even if you are able to manage to resolve the sleep despite the upset being there, you should be able to mitigate most of the health issues, because the health issues are caused by the lack of sleep. I mean, it's true to say that like an emotional upset it hasn't impacted the immune system, all that stuff. That has been measured. But again, how and why, and I think the sleep is a major factor. The upset impacts the sleep, and then the lack of sleep impacts the immune system. So that was a massive tangent. Sorry, you started talking about as you get older.
No, but it's true. It's true, because you just think, like, well, why would they need less sleep? You'd certainly think they might even need more. I mean, it's as we grow and mature in that way.
I think it's not that they need less sleep; it's they're less able to give the simple answer. And so I would see the amount you're able to sleep as a good measure of your level of health and vitality. If you think about people who sleep the most, it's babies and teenagers. And in both cases, because they're doing a lot of growing, that is true. But in both cases as well, they're full of a lot of vitality in two different ways, right? And so the higher vitality you have, the more you can sleep. And again, I say it's easy to not believe that, because we see people who seem to be very vital who don't sleep a lot. But as I said, that's a trick of stress chemicals. And I think I've shown you the ways that you can kind of tell that apart.
Absolutely. Absolutely. Then that's going to lead me into, you discussed meditation and the benefits of that as well alongside of it. And then, looking at how much time we actually would, or how many years or, of our life we would actually spend sleeping. But then you've also got, the spiritual gurus out there potentially that are saying that you might be, wasting your life by sleeping so much. So what are your thoughts on that?
Yeah. I study a lot of spiritual gurus. I mean, Sadhguru is someone we've mentioned before. I think he's the most popular spiritual guru ever, if it goes by YouTube views and Facebook views and all the rest of it. And he says that. But, as I said, this is not just him. This goes back to, a lot of people who claim to have been awakened or enlightened. I say claimed only because I don't know, not because they haven't. They often say that. And so I wanted to address that. That's a good point. Here's my response to that. The goal of enlightenment from their point of view is to be fully conscious, right? And as I said, so that's fully conscious in your waking life, fully conscious when you're dreaming, and fully conscious even during deep sleep as well, which you should, according to them, you're just conscious of only God, presence, spirit, whatever you want to call it, right? So I can understand their perspective, assuming that there is such a thing as enlightenment and all the rest. I don't know, because I haven't achieved it. But here's what I'd say. In the same way that I don't think, like, if you take a peak physical specimen who's like, looks the way you want to look and does all the things you want to do, and ask them what their diet is, and if you eat that diet, it might make you like fat and unhealthy. And the reason is because you don't have the genetics that they do. You don't have the activity level that they do. You don't have the lifestyle that they do, right? So it's like copying someone in one area who is at a peak level is not necessarily beneficial for you at the level that you're at, right? We talked about this in the metabolism one. We said, people who have a really strong, fast metabolism, maybe they do well with a lot of carbohydrate, but I do recognize that a lot of people don't. People who are suboptimally healthy, a lot of the time they do better with less carbohydrate. So it really depends on where you're at. And of course, there's genetic variances of that as well. So when it comes to this thing, I think they are actually right in theory. If the options were being enlightened and being fully conscious or not, you're better off being enlightened and fully conscious. And do I believe that those people maybe thrive despite only sleeping, a very small amount of hours a night, or not at all maybe? Yes, I can believe that because of the research that has shown that people who really meditate, people who are experienced and seasoned, they get so much benefit from it that it's actually equivalent to a lot of sleep. So do I believe that someone who lives in a constant meditative state could walk around going, you don't need to sleep, sleep is a waste of life, you should be, focused on being fully conscious? Yes. But I would compare that to reality, right? And so I'd say, again, like reference ranges and then like realizing where you're at. So if you're not an enlightened person, if you do not live a life that's constantly meditative or are not meditating many, many, many hours a day, then, and again, this is something that these days is not even a matter of opinion. Like we can use brain, like those machines to measure brain waves and go, do you have an enlightened level of brain waves or do you have a normal level of brain waves, right? So, and certain people have submitted to those and you can see, oh, wow, look at that. Oh, they really are different from most humans. So if you're one of the, and Wim Hof has probably put himself under more of that scrutiny than ever, right? And he's proven he can defy the laws of biochemistry, right? I think one of the things I saw him talk about is like he's able to hold a posture for hours and hours, and the way that he does it is he turns lactic acid back into glucose. That shouldn't be possible from a normal chemistry point of view, but he does explain those sages throughout the ages who are like able to stay in, postures for impossibly long periods of time when you or I or anyone else would be aching, right? And like it would be, impossible to do. So there are people who can break the rules of biochemistry that's always been kind of known, stroke suspected, but it's starting to be proven, right? In certain areas at least. And so if you're breaking the rules of biochemistry, then sure, have 4 hours sleep, have no sleep. But you have to be really, really sure that's what you're doing. And so I think those people are trying to do, like, let's assume that they are genuine, right? They're trying to help us to be enlightened, to not be, a slave to, like, the idea I said, the conscious mind is like a tiny part of the unconscious mind. So they're trying to expand consciousness so much that, you're conscious of all of it, not just the tiny bit, but like the whole unconscious, right? And as I said, you can see that in the brain, like the whole brain is lit up and the whole brain is in a very high level of coherence and alignment with each other. But that's not a normal functioning for most of us. So if we're in a normal level of functioning, if we're normal people, Matthew Walker's research has very conclusively shown we need that 8 hours plus of sleep, or at least 7 hours, ideally 8 hours plus of sleep. If you're a super enlightened guru, then sure. You can hold your breath for an hour and you can, hold a posture for a day and all this crazy stuff that we can never do. But I think that is the distinction. Yeah. So by all means, aim for that. Like try and become a super enlightened guru who doesn't need sleep, doesn't need food, doesn't need rest, whatever. But you also got to just be realistic. And I think the danger of that is that for every one genuine guru who's managed it and has proven that they can under laboratory conditions or could prove that they could, there's probably 1,000 delusional narcissists who think that they have godlike powers and, that the rules of the world doesn't apply to them. But of course it actually does. So, as I said, if you're really sure that you're that special, you don't need much sleep, prove it. Like, do some extensive testing on yourself. And if all the scientists look like, whoa, then maybe you're right. But if they're like, maybe you're not.
Well, Ellen, as always, this has been very insightful. And so just as we were coming to a close, I just want to, throw it out to you again, as we always do. Just, if you have any final thoughts to share with those that are listening.
Please share your experience. What works for you best to get to sleep, right? I've shared what I understand, but I'm sure there's stuff that I don't know. Tell us. Let us know.
Wonderful. Well, thank you. Thank you again. I know, sleep is a big thing. And I realized too, it's like at the times where when I didn't have it, like we talked about, in this episode, and then when I got it, it's like, oh, wait a minute. Okay. It's the value. Really, I understood the value. Because I just hadn't had the direct experience before. So, yes, please do. Those of you that are listening and that you want to know more, share your experiences. Tell us what works for you, what doesn't work for you. And, ask us to, if there's anything that you want us to delve deeper into, because we really want to hear your feedback. We want to hear your stories. So again, as always, please hit the like and subscribe button so you don't miss an episode, and we'll see you next time.
Hey, I hope you enjoyed that video. You may have noticed I recommended a few different videos in that episode, and one of the ones I recommend is just here, if you want to click there, or another one I recommend is just below, if you want to click on that one and watch that next.